All right, folks, it's Unchained Skid with you here, and I think we actually have 3 viewers tuning in with us tonight. So, any of you viewers, if you can, put something in the comments there to say you can hear me okay, because I was playing with my sound levels, and I think we got it sorted out. But any thumbs up on there would be appreciated. Welcome to the first skid stream of all time here. I'm very, very pleased to present a gentleman who I've really appreciated and come to know over the past few years. He's written a book, many books, but the one in particular that I got to know him from was The Rules. As I have given a little whiteboard presentation on one of Pop's podcasts lately, I was talking about mental point of origin. The Rules is very much along the same lines of getting in tune with your mental point of origin. Along the same lines of such books as How I Found Freedom in an Unfree World. But Brant's book I found much, much more practical. So without further ado, let's bring Dr. Von Gobles onto the stage. Good evening, Brant. How are you this evening?
Well, it's actually morning over here. It's
Right.
0400 Central European time, so bright and early.
Yeah. Well, it's very, very good to have you here. Thank you for getting up so early in the morning, sir. It's good to have you. I just gave a bit of an introduction there as to how I ran into your book. And in fact, that's the reason that we got in contact in the first place, is I read your book and I reached out to you because I thought it was such a good piece of work. But without me talking about it, I'd rather have you talk about it. So let's first of all just kind of get into your background, just personal background and stuff, and that'll lead into why you ended up writing the book in the first place.
Okay. Well, I'll kind of begin on. There are a lot of different ways I can answer that question. I'll tell a little bit about my professional background and then my travels, and maybe that'll tie us in. I studied for a doctoral. Okay. I studied for a doctoral degree. I have a doctoral degree in motivation. Studied in motivational theory and really social emotional learning, and I have an EDD in that. And later went on and got a JD. I'm not a practicing attorney, but I do have a law degree from a U.S. institutions. I lived in the People's Republic of China for 3.5 years, on and off. I've lived in Tbilisi, Republic of Georgia, and now I'm based in Central Europe in Hungary. I think really that there were a couple of things, both personal experiences in my life, that really made me reevaluate what I wanted to do and prioritize. And I'm getting a lot of lens glare, so we'll try this. The other factor I would say is looking at different cultures and seeing how different people prioritize different things. Until you kind of stepped out of your culture, it's really easy to forget or not fully appreciate that people can have different value stacks. For instance, when I was in China, I saw there was a lot less emphasis on romantic love and attachment and a lot more emphasis on family obligations. So that was one of the things that really started me thinking about the path of how I wrote the book. And I started looking at my own experiences in the United States and how I had centered my life, and looking at how people in China centered their lives, and realizing how much of what men's efforts were really just expected to be self-sacrificing rather than rational, self-interested, with that being a theme that I saw in a lot of the places I visited.
Right. And would you say then that having noticed these things and these differences, and then getting this global perspective, and then coming back and, like you say, seeing that men especially, but everybody to a certain extent,
well, sure, of course, everybody
are trying to be always being told a message of self-sacrifice instead of motivated self-interest. Is this something that led you to want to write the book, to get that kind of message out to those guys?
Yes. I'm writing primarily for an American audience because the Chinese audience, first of all, my Chinese is pretty atrocious. So they would think that a schizophrenic with a drinking problem hammered it out.
So Pop,
not to offend any schizophrenics with drinking problems. We all have our bad days, and no ill will on my part here. But the language issue, I really focused on the American audience because I saw, whereas in China the values were very family centered, and there is a kind of patriarchal emphasis there because you keep the family together, right? Which means men and women alike are expected somewhat to sacrifice for the integrity of the family. And there are compelling historical and economic and agricultural reasons for that, as there typically are for culture. But I really focused on the American audience because I saw so much of I saw men hand over their mental point of origin, and I'll introduce another term, their locus of control to external forces and external validation, and a lot of that to the women around them, which is, not to attack women's ability to manage their own affairs, but it has a tendency to put everyone at a disadvantage when men center too much of their mental point of origin around women, around romantic attachment, and when they center too much of their locus of control on the validation, the expectations, and the feelings of others. Makes for a lot of very unstable, unhappy, and ultimately unproductive people.
Yeah. Well, as we had said before with the mental point of origin type stuff, I mean, you have to put your own oxygen mask on first before you help anybody else. And it seems to me the messaging is the exact opposite. And this is something that you kind of got at in your book there.
Yes.
Let's see. By writing the book towards this audience, and obviously part of it is just getting a message out, were you hoping to accomplish something else with this other than just get the message out? Were you hoping to invoke some kind of change or etc.?
Well, I wrote it for two people. I wrote it for two groups of people. Well, two group. Boy, this is awkward grammatically. And the funny thing is I edit professionally. Okay. I wrote it for two audiences. Let's phrase it that way. The first audience was me. I wrote this first and foremost because I wanted to articulate, to refine, and to codify a system of values and a system of thinking that I could live by. And so, as much as anything else, this was a process of cultivating my own mind, my own thinking, and my own values in a way that you can think about things and turn them around your head. But frankly, until you put them in some kind of tangible, permanent form, you don't have a good record of it, and you really can't reference it. And that's important for anybody. Codify your values, codify your priorities, and articulate your thinking. Put it in something tangible so you can go back, reevaluate it, touch upon it, and see that you're being true to yourself throughout life. I advocate that for anyone, man or woman. The other person wrote it was for people I saw, primarily men, who were in a similar position I was, who were operating from a position of perceived powerlessness because they had handed over their power to too many other people. And what I really wanted to do was to write for friends I have, people I've seen in the community, guys I've seen who have had, serious breakdowns, serious problems, a lot of it avoidable because they weren't, as you said, putting on their oxygen mask first. And so I'm writing for me and for people who are really in a similar position to me. And my goal is not political because frankly, don't have a lot of faith in political involvement. My goal is to not necessarily propagate a specific set of values for people, other than to help men focus on their own priorities and then from there make informed decisions rather than being coerced or led into them. The key here is intentionality. So
don't give them a fish, teach them how to fish. And also don't convince the government to give them fish because that's not going to help either.
Well, okay. They forget how to fish, and the fish ends up being contaminated, and there's a giant warehouses filled with fish.
Exactly. All right, I'd like to dig into the book a little bit to give folks out there an idea of the kind of content that you have in here. And the first thing that I wanted to touch on is one of the very first things that you bring up in the book, and you call them the 4 rules themselves, because the book is called The Rules. And so as a good author, you actually say what those rules are. So if we could touch on the 4 rules first, and I think if I was smart, as you are talking about that, I'll actually bring it up on the screen here.
All right, and I'll have to put back on my glasses because all I see are blobs.
There you go. All right. So to reiterate the 4 rules. Oh, I went past the chapter. Excuse me. New podcaster here.
Take your time.
Do you have a hard copy right there in front of you?
I do. Let me go ahead and pull up this, and I'll do my little brag. I don't make that much money on it, but I'm in the second edition now. It's
Yeah.
hardcover, so it's more substantial, and it's fairly weighty. I don't think I would try to use it as body armor at all. Might stop a 22, but a 22 short. But don't try that one at home, guys. Don't do that. Okay.
All right, there you go. I've got your PDF. Sorry, Brant. I got your PDF up there, and we're right at the rules there.
Okay. So give as little as possible, take as much as possible, always have an exit, and enjoy your life to the fullest, right? So what this really is about optimization and intentionality. Give as little as possible, meaning think of this as a series of negotiations, as in the negotiation. You always want the best deal possible. You don't overpay for a car. You don't overpay for, if you bargain. I lived in China. They bargain for everything. They bargain over the price of underwear, weirdly enough. You might be surprised at how much you can haggle over a pair of underwear, how long it can take. And people will do it. But you want the best deal. So you give as little as possible and you take as much as possible. And that's really simply about getting the best deal. I want the most I can get for the least I can get. That's simply rational self-interest applied to life. Always have an exit. People who don't have an exit get frantic. People who don't have an exit get panicky. And people with no exit get dangerous. This goes all the way back to Sun Tzu. You don't push your enemies back to a river, because what you're going to end up doing is just making him fight harder. He has nowhere to go. You give people an out, because if they don't have an out, the entire decision-making matrix changes. Then you get desperation. Then you get irrationality. Then you get self-destruction. Then you get outward destruction. You don't want to be in a position for your benefit, or really for anybody else's benefit, where there's nothing you can do but respond in the most desperate way possible, because desperation doesn't make for good, rational, sensible, practical decisions. It makes for kind of imposed insanity, frankly.
Right.
And then finally, enjoy your life to the fullest. I say this: you have to think about lifespan. If you've got 3 months to live, I can't really tell you too much. I'm not going to advocate you do anything reckless or dangerous or whatever it is, but I will say it probably won't catch up with you in 3 months. But as far as enjoying your life to the fullest, think about it. Do that with an emphasis on the term that you want to live, which is to say, heavy drug use, hedonism, extreme hedonism, and anything else probably won't be very good for you in the long term. Typically doesn't. My father was an alcohol and drug counselor for 30 years. It has a tendency to catch up with you, that kind of stuff. Yeah. So I focus on enjoying your life to the fullest means balancing out what you want in the short, medium, and long term, and trying to get the greatest degree of happiness and satisfaction you can from life. And my theory is the more people who are encouraged to operate under these sound mechanisms of rational self-interest, the better everyone will be.
Absolutely. As I read it and as I read it back when, a couple questions came to mind, and audience members probably have something similar, is when you say take as much as possible, and you do go on to explain yourself here, you don't mean in a criminal way. You don't mean go off in that, because when we're talking about motivated self-interest, you're going to be operating against your self-interest if you break the law or do some of that. We're talking about take as much as possible, meaning in the sense of good business, in the sense of how you trade your time, your money, etc. That's what you're getting at, correct?
Yes, and I'll clarify that. I refer back to the Chinese underwear negotiation. You could get a better deal in the short term if you just held the guy up and stole his cart of underwear. But in the long term, there are going to be consequences for that, right? Somebody's going to be angry about you stealing his underwear cart or stealing the car. And so you operate with this understanding of repercussions. And the idea on a larger perspective, on a meta perspective, is by us all operating under this mechanism effectively of rational self-interest, we balance each other's concerns out. Yeah. That's why we control criminality. That's why we maintain an orderly society, with you operating towards your interest, me operating towards mine. And not necessarily relying too much on blind trust. And we could go into John Nash and some of his theories about maintaining equilibrium through self-interest and all that. But really, you have to think about the repercussions of what you do over a term of time to fill this out. And so that means generally anyway, staying on the right side of the law, on the right side of what I would call aggressive and determined business practices without criminality. And there is a clear difference between those two if you understand them.
Absolutely. It reminds me a lot of objectivism, Ayn Rand objectivism as well. If anybody could have rational self-interest, we'd all get along so well. But of course, that doesn't happen. One other point that I'd bring out there when you say enjoy your life to the fullest, clarifying that, and you kind of did earlier on, because one of the things you mentioned was you have to, one of the reasons you wrote the book for yourself as the first audience was to clarify exactly what it is that you want. And I talked about this in my mental point of origin briefing, is like, you really need to sit down and figure out what it is that you want. And so when we say enjoy your life to the fullest, it's, as you said, it's not just necessarily a hedonistic pursuit. You have to figure out, first of all, what is fullest for you, and then go get it.
Well, and another thing I'd add is if you talk to people who have been hardened hedonists. I have some friends, I'm not going to name them. I have friends who are musicians. I mean, that they've got their whole lifestyle. That is kind of a lifestyle. And talk to these people, and what you'll find out is that just a life of aggressive hedonism really isn't all that happy in the long term. It does fatigue you. It does age you really aggressively. And you'll find that gets pretty hollow and pretty tedious over time. Yeah. The thing I emphasize so much of is that too many books, and I try to separate myself from other books kind of in this category of related to focusing on your goals and your well-being. Too many of them just tell you what you want. You should want to be rich. You should want to make $400,000 a year. You should want a Lamborghini, blah, blah, blah. You may not. The first thing you have to figure out, and this is something I reiterate with all the questions throughout my book, is you need to figure out what you want before you can make any other steps. Otherwise, you're just driving blind.
Well, and it's a good segue into the next thing that you talk about in the book, which is you call the Evil Five here. And let me just see if I can get us down to that as quick as I can. I think the easiest way is to just scroll down. Here we are. And it's funny how you kind of make it like an Eve there with the five, and I see what you did there. But the Evil Five. So I guess what was your message here with the Evil Five?
Okay, I would say this: there are a lot of things that you can do in moderation that are fine, but the problem is a huge number of people have a hard time maintaining moderation. I have known people who used illegal drugs for years and then they just quit. They didn't seem to they did not relapse. They did not seem to have any ongoing problems. They just seemed to be able. They did it. It was part of a scene. It was part of a partying thing. It was part of a culture. They quit one day. They never touched it again. They never thought about it again. They switched from hard drugs to Totina's pizza rolls, and it seemed like it was a perfectly adequate substitute for them. But those guys are outliers. You know, the kind of person who can say, you know what, heroin's just not doing it for me anymore. I think I'm going to switch over to Ben and Jerry's. That's it. All right. That's an unusual guy. And so what I caution with a lot of these things is that they have a tendency to trap you in addiction really, really quickly. And I would liken this to firearms. In Canada, I know those are kind of hard to get now, but
don't get me started.
Yeah, I'm not going to get you started on all the gun grabbing.
Another stream.
Yeah, that's another stream. But the fact is, I'm not going to tell somebody never drink alcohol, but I will tell them it can catch up with you really quickly. It has a tendency to catch up with people fast. Drug consumption, I'm not going to take an absolute puritanical teetotaling perspective and say never do it. But I will caution you that they're not inherently bad. I even say that on the first page. but you need to guard yourself against them because they're so quick to pull you into excess. I'll go to the fourth one and then kind of circle back. I talk about the pursuit of sex and the consequences of sex. I later talk about that in my book, and I say, why do people pursue that so much? And that's something a lot of guys I find don't think about. Sometimes they just, I think that sometimes men pursue what I call coitus, etc., which is the most romantic term I could think of for the whole thing. Sometimes they're pursuing it because of an organic interest. And frankly, sometimes they're pursuing it to prove a point. And you have to be very careful about that. First of all, you have to ask, to whom are you trying to prove this point? You're not going to beat Gene Simmons and his 2,000 girlfriends, probably. You're not going to beat Genghis Khan. You don't have, the horse and all the other stuff. With whom are you trying to impress on that? And it's not that I'm taking an anti-sex or a sex-negative position or whatever you say, but I will caution that once people have a tendency to focus on that to excess and really center their lives around that, make their mental point of origin, or make their identity based on sex, it really makes them vulnerable because you're essentially constantly seeking approval from a consenting person. That's surrendering a lot of power when you center your life around that. Status seeking, I talk about status versus respect. Respect is something that's built up over a long time. Status is really fragile. And status is oftentimes extremely superficial. And again, when you focus on status, you have a tendency to move your mental point of origin and your locus of control from self to others, which really makes you more vulnerable. That doesn't mean you have to wear rags and walk around like a homeless guy and never bathe. I mean, but it doesn't mean you have to be anti-status. But you need to be aware of the fact that you're investing. There's a potential for you to invest a lot in essentially a really short-term high. And so I caution against that. And socializing. It's great to have friends, but I've seen how much time that can suck up. If you've been in a culture like China, you see there's a huge amount of investment in social relationship maintenance, much more so than the West. And that can become something that burns a huge amount of your time, energy, mental struggle, and it can make you very fragile to, again, the perspectives of others, which really takes the control away from you and puts it in the hands of other people. So I can say, be careful of the company you keep.
I think what I got as I read your book, and obviously we're just kind of going over the surface of it here. So when people read it, they can dig in. When I dig in, it's like, you're not saying any of these things are inherently bad in themselves. You're saying that each one of them takes a significant amount of time, energy, the way you structure your life, and you've only got so much of that to go around. And so you should be very careful how you spend your energy. For example, number 4, the pursuit of sex. I mean, we all want that. Of course we do. That's the desire to reproduce at the very outset. But, Aaron Clarey makes a great argument economically about that, is like, how much time and effort are you spending doing this? And you're not saying don't do it. What you're saying is make sure you have your priorities sorted out ahead of time. As we said, figure out what it is that you want. And I think the reason why you isolate these 5 more than anything else is because they are so advertised to us in the West. Drink, do your drugs, get on Facebook, get on TikTok, get on whatever, get on Tinder, then, make sure you have your car, make sure you have your house. So there's all those things that you have in your list there. It's advertised to us totally all the time to get in our minds to think that these things are so important. They are important. However, taken to an excess like you're talking about here, that's where the problem starts in. Does that seem a reasonable interpretation of some of what you said?
That's a great interpretation. And what I would stress is, to put it in a larger perspective, I think there's a saying, and I'm probably mangling it horribly, but in Russia, death is desirable. In Europe, death is inevitable. And in California, death is optional. And unfortunately, the last part of that, the last third of that statement is false. We have a tendency to forget how very, very limited our time is. And that's something I stress in this book. You can make more money, but you can never make more time. You can't. And we have a tendency to be programmed to focus on these things, not necessarily because we want them Anybody who's ever done heavy drinking knows in the long term, it's not that much fun, certainly not the day after. Drug use catches up with you. Socializing can be exhausting. You can really get too much of these. And you can destroy, you can take a lot of your time, and which is truly a precious thing, and throw it away if you don't really carefully, really rationally manage it. And that's something I stress in my book.
Good. Going on into some more content in your book there, I noted down, I won't go to the exact chapter, but we were talking about shame, and you bring out the concept of shame in your book, especially with respect to the big three. And I guess I should probably get a list of the big three up here. What were our big three again? Because one is a house. Oh, there we are. Right. Getting married, attending college, and buying a home. And you isolate these out as the big conventions, the big three that can really mess with you in the context of shame. And what did you mean by that, Brant? What were you trying to get at in this chapter?
Shame's not inherently bad. Shame has its purposes. When you're in a tribe, when you're in a tribal group or a band or whatever structure of civilization you're in, you do need some way to get people to comply, or the tribe collapses. You do have to have some way other than just beating people with a Paleolithic axe to make them comply. You need something softer than just clunking people in the head, cudgeling. And so shame can absolutely have its uses when you're trying to maintain a cohesive civilization. But you need to be very careful about the people whom you give the power to shame you. I mention in my book, I say, it would be very difficult for an Aztec priest to shame you for not participating in a human sacrifice. He could try, but at the same time, it probably wouldn't work, because no matter how heartfelt his message was, pardon the pun, you're not going to care that much, because our values don't align, right? It's like this, that's your culture, that's your identity, that's your thing, that's not mine. I don't do human sacrifices. I don't have to worship the sun, blah, blah, blah. So you're kind of naturally, you're not going to assign that person the ability to shame you, because you don't care what he thinks. And so you need to be careful about giving people the ability to shame you or being sensitive to that, because it's giving them a certain level of control. And I mentioned getting married, attending college, and buying a home for 3 reasons. I'm not saying absolutely never do those, although I would really aggressively caution against college for most young men, given its ideology, its cost, and its low return on investment. And Aaron Clary's talked about this a huge amount too. Yeah. These are not civilizationally necessary, right? We're not going to, if you let's just flip the opposite. Let's say you're a never married, vocationally trained plumber who rents. You are not going to be the downfall of civilization, right? You're not ripping out people's hearts and severing heads and destroying the fabric of civilization. These are not civilizationally essential, but they're encouraged largely for economic reasons and to move the locus of control and to move the authority from you to other people, because they have a tendency to require large investments from the man and minimal investment from everybody else. You get married, you've got more to lose than the woman, barring some very unusual circumstances. And they do exist, but the majority of the time, okay? Attending college, I call college the worst deal imaginable. It's like having to pay for your car for 4 years and knowing that if you irritate the dealer at any time, he won't give you the car at the end. You put in all the effort, and then at the end, they give you a piece of wallpaper that's worth $1.50. Buying a home can be okay, but at the same time, a lot of times you're going deeply into debt. A lot of times the management is bad. Frankly, the market's massively overheated, and that's done as much as anything else to attach you. That's promoted to attach you and to make you more vulnerable. I don't ever tell people just don't do something, but I really caution them. Be aware, very aware of the reasons you're doing this and how much power you're handing over to others when you do them. And don't allow yourself to be forced into these because of shame.
Yeah. Well, this is it. These 3 that you've isolated here are the most expensive. And so because of that, you are more than likely going to incur debt because of all of these. And as soon as you are
Yes.
in debt because of these, then you don't have that locus of control anymore. And that's
Yes.
how they will get you to do what they want. And so in order to bring people to these, it's not a bad thing. Again, like the five, this isn't a bad, it's not necessarily bad to want to get married. It's not bad to attend college. It's not bad to buy a home, but you have to do it for the right reasons that you've ascertained for yourself and figured that out in your priorities. And what you're getting at here is that there will be a lot of shame directed at you to make this kind of thing. Like, you're not a man until you pick one of these three or all of them. And so the rational person, as they go into this, makes these decisions on their own, is what you're saying. And be very, very careful. And Jack Donovan has some, he wrote a lot about this in terms of shame. He says you should never worry about shame from people outside your tribe. And by definition, anybody who's not in your close friend circle is outside your tribe. So what do you care what somebody, talking head somewhere, is saying? It doesn't matter. It matters what you and the people close to you think. That's where shame comes from, is to keep you within that group, not to sell a house. So be very, very, very careful of that. I think Jack had a great saying. He said, men who are good at being who are a good man, but not good at being a man, make for very good slaves. So be very careful. Be good at being a man. Don't necessarily be a good man, because they will tell you following these three is what makes you a good man. What makes you a good man is whatever you decide. Let's see. Go ahead. Sorry.
The one thing I would stress is that these are all, from a legal perspective, they're all liabilities, and you should be very careful about incurring liability.
Okay. I'm just going to take this thing off the screen here for a second. Okay. So we can just see our mugs there. That's funny. It didn't light you up as much because it wasn't on the screen. There you go. I should put it back on to get your face lit up. One of the things that you talked, I wanted to reach back. So for example, to make that point a little more, to bring it home a little more, for example, education. So one of the things that I wanted to ask was, you wrote this book, you set it out for yourself, do you follow your own rules, is going to be the first thing. It's like when people go to a doctor's office and he's sitting there smoking, or he's huge and fat, and he's telling you how to be healthy, you're kind of like, So if you were going to write a book about rules about life, are you following them? And so that's what people would want to know. And the first thing I would ask then is, how do you explain, and not that explanation is necessary, and I know you have a good one, but what do you say when people would say, well, hey man, you got your doctorate and you're saying don't necessarily go for higher education? What led you to that and would lead you to write your book in such a way?
All right. A couple of points. One extremely minor aside. When I was in China many years ago, I actually had a doctor who was a chain smoker in his office. And the funny thing is, he knew I didn't smoke. Every time I'd go in, he'd offer me a cigarette. I'd say, bouillon. I'd say, no, thanks. And then he knew 2 words of English. In English, he would say, I'd reject the cigarette. And then he'd go, very good. So it became a test. So there you go. You passed the test.
Yeah, good one, Doc.
Okay. Really more of a do as I say, not as I do kind of doctor. But okay. Here's how I would explain why I've got so much schooling, but I wouldn't encourage it. Let me put this in perspective. First of all, I'm 40 years old. I started school a long time ago. I started school in the year 2000, right? The old Conan O'Brien song, in the year 2000, if you remember that, the falsetto guy. Year 2000 was very different. One, college was much cheaper than it was. I mean, that was 23 years ago. Now it's insanely expensive. 2, there was not the ideological capture. Yes, college was left-leaning in the year 2000. It was not a cesspit of, nobody tried to beat me over the head with the little red book. It had its ideological leanings, but the fact is we've had a long-term, really starting since the 80s, effort to capture higher educational institutions. In 2000, a lot of people who hadn't been captured still worked there. They're retired out. The ideologues are who remain. So it's really worse. It's more. It was cheaper then. It wasn't as ideological then, and frankly, the alternatives weren't as good. 2000 was the era of. I'm going to take these off because you're getting lens glare.
Sorry.
No, it's. I don't want to give anybody a seizure. That's my concern. That'd be. That's. But in the year 2000, that was the era of dial-up internet. Sure, you could get a T1, line. You'd get a dedicated line. Almost nobody had those. You were probably using modem, right? Some analog modem, not DSL, not fiber, not cable. Now, or at that time, you essentially had text-based websites. Now you have Coursera, you have Udemy, you have Khan Academy, you have YouTube videos, you have companies like Chinese Pod. You want to learn a foreign language, you can go online and find someone to practice with, a native speaker, and they don't even charge you. It's just, we'll speak in Chinese for an hour today, and then the next lesson we'll speak in English for an hour. So you can trade your skills, right, for free. You can get a course in Python development for $100. And we're talking about like 300 lessons. It's an insane amount of material. I took a class in Tuvan throat singing for $40. The amount of resources that you have available now are much, much, much better because there's video streaming, there's audio streaming, there's real-time in-person lessons, there's video over IP, voice over IP lessons. There's a huge amount of low-cost or free material. It's a better alternative than it was. So we've really got that. And finally, the fact is, I've been in this system a long time. It's a lot easier to start down the right path and just stay on it than it is to go down a different path, get halfway down it, backtrack, and then go down a completely different path, which would be kind of what that would be. One of the reasons I stayed in school as long as I was because I was already pretty entrenched in the system. Even then, with all of my credentials, I would point out that I've never worked for any length of time for a U.S. institution. There is an ideological bias in that model, which is one of the reasons I've worked with foreign institutions. So if you're going to consider college, I would say keep in mind this, relative to my era, it costs a lot more. It's a lot more ideological. There's much less emphasis on meritocracy. There's a lot more in the way of, frankly, bigotry. The alternatives, the non-college alternatives, are far superior. And keep in mind, even if you're as credentialed as I am, if you want to work in academia, it's probably going to be outside of the West. The only people I would say should consider going to school, and I'll better make this quick, would be people who have a real passion for something like law or medicine and who just absolutely can't live their life dream any other way. And even then, keep in mind, in some states such as California, you don't actually have to get your undergrad to become a lawyer. So check into your jurisdiction.
Yeah. Well, I think,
answer that pretty well.
I think so. What I'd pile on to that is, I'm pretty well educated myself, a bachelor, 2 master's degrees, an unbelievable amount of flight school and training that way. And, I say the same thing to the folks there, and I tell my kids is like, look, I get it. There's 2 facets to education. There's exactly what you were just talking about, which is information. And the information can be gotten so many cheaper ways now that keep your eye out for those sources and be aware of the fact that you're living in the internet age. I mean, I started going to university in 1986. Okay. They didn't have the internet then. Right. So it's very, very changed. But the second part of education, though, and this is the unfortunate fact about it, is the credentialism, the encroaching credentialism. It may be that in order to do what you want to do, as Nietzsche said, it's not that you can do it, it's that you have to be recognized to be able to do it. And so you need to have the credential to do it. Okay, so that becomes part of your calculus, pardon the pun, for figuring out whether that comes into your priorities or not. If it's something that you really want to do, but it needs this credential that you have to get from that school, okay, then that's what you're going to have to do. I think what Brant's cautioning you guys about out there is never take on something like this, especially something as big as going to school, because you're shamed into doing it. In other words, oh, you're not going to be respected unless you have a degree. Okay, those days are done. Like that anybody who's telling you that has no clue what's going on nowadays. There is many ways of skinning this cat. Pick the one that you want. That's all we're saying. Make sense?
And the other thing I would add is be aware of the fact that the value of these credentials is degrading as more and more people understand how poor the level of education is.
Yeah.
I know when I worked with people, I know that even in other countries, the value of a Western degree is deteriorating because even they're starting to say people are coming back without knowing how to do a thing. You know,
it's true.
So don't bank on that unless it's statutorily required. Don't bank on that credential giving you a lot of anything other than debt.
Okay, cool. I wanted to swing back a little bit to kind of the way you've structured your life. You lived in some very interesting places, and this kind of comes back to the question: do you live as per the book? But before I do, I've got like 4 people watching, and I had one chat that came up where somebody said hello. So in order to at least show it, thank you, Chesroy, for saying hello. Hello. That's good. Hello. Thank you for coming out. Does anybody out there, the 4 of you, does anybody you have any questions that you'd like to ask to Brant, having listened to this so far? And thanks for staying tuned. We'll give you a couple of seconds to think about it. If you do, put it. Oh, he just gave me a little smiley face. But if you have any questions, please feel free. In the meantime, I'm going to kind of dig in a bit into Brant's background here, and then we'll kind of to wrap this up. Just because I don't want to give away the whole book, I want people to get a hold of your book and actually read it, and hopefully this gives them a little taste of what's in there. But you know, way back in the day, and I really even hate to mention this term on YouTube because it's got so many connotations now, but MGTOW. MGTOW used to mean something in 2009, which is completely different from what it means now. Back then, it was just simply the idea that, look, it was exactly what we're talking about. Don't let people tell you what to do. You figure out what you want to do and then go do it. And so, I mean, in a classical sense, that's kind of what we're talking about here. And it seems to me that in the way that you've structured your life and just, hey, you know what, I'm going to go here and do this for a while. Oh, this interests me. I'm going to go over here. You've lived in some interesting places. Is this kind of the philosophy by which you've guided yourself once you sat down and figured out, you know, kind of how you wanted to go about it?
Yes. I'm going to say this. First of all, one of the reasons that I don't really attach a label to my book is because there's too much in the way of political ability to transform some terms to mean something else.
Exactly.
So I've written my book as a self-contained unit so that you can't say, oh, well, this is adjacent to this, and this is adjacent to some kind of supremacy, and this is adjacent. No. What's in my book is in my book. It speaks for itself. It's a freestanding thing, which is not condemning other people's beliefs or perspectives. But I'm very careful to say that I don't want to hitch it to something else because, frankly, there's so much in the way of ideological chicanery now and transformation and fluidity. I don't want it to be perceived as to somehow be associated with something that doesn't have anything to do with what I wrote. And
exactly.
That's why. So as far as how I've lived my life, focusing on my goals and interests, I have friends. I've helped friends out over the years because I choose to. Mm-hmm. I have built relationships with people whom I value as individuals, not because of their specific status or their class or because I've been told to. I've deliberately built long-term relationships and friendships. And that's great. That's what I encourage everybody to do. But don't be pressured into it because of a need to conform. As far as how I've lived, yes. Without going into my background too much, I'm from a fairly modest rural background. I wanted to see a lot of the world. I wanted to get a lot of different perspective, and I have. I lived in Republic of Georgia for a year and a half, a little more than a year. Great place, good food, nice hiking, blah, blah, blah. And I've really allowed my interests and my own desires to guide me throughout life. And I don't want to say I've perfectly adhered to the policy because it's hard to never be subject to peer or social pressure. That's an unusual person who's completely insensitive to that. But I make a point to, on an ongoing basis, assess why I'm doing what I'm doing and see if I'm doing it in accordance to my goals, my priorities, and my decisions. So yes, I do try.
I think it was really, I mean, we've stayed in touch over the years here. I think it was really
Mhm.
interesting when you were living in Georgia, especially
Mhm.
as the Ukraine conflict started, and you kind of had not exactly right at the front, but certainly adjacent to viewpoint on
Mhm.
what was happening around there, especially as a whole bunch of Russian soldiers show up all of a sudden who don't want to get drafted and things like that. I think
Yes.
it's, you know, um, people have asked me from time to time, it's like, how do you figure out, what's real and what's not in the news and stuff? And I was like, well, that's really hard to do. For one thing,
Mhm.
you got to go to a bunch of different sources. But what I like doing is talking to people who are there. And you were
Yes.
there. You were pretty close. So I think you live a very interesting life and putting yourself into some really interesting situations. I mean,
Mhm.
you don't speak Georgian, you don't speak Hungarian, and there you are making it happen. And which is the university you're working at right now again?
I'm working. I don't know if I'm supposed to disclose my employer,
Oh, okay.
but I
Just
am working. But
one
I'm
of the one
working.
of the universities in Hungary, then, right? So
Let's let's just say it's like let's just say I work for a very small institution in Hungary,
yeah.
and it gives me a good basis of operation because I'm actually pretty close to Vienna, where I've
Hmm.
been. I'm pretty close to Budapest. I'm actually planning a vacation to Switzerland this winter break, just because I want to see Switzerland and there's nothing there. See what neutrality looks like. See what armed neutrality looks like. You
It's the
know.
best. Oh, good.
Uh,
Yeah. I know. I think it's a really great example from my perspective. Having known you as I have and watched what you've done, I think you're living exactly what you wrote in the book. So it's pretty cool. And like I say, just kind of summing it up, I read it, and I think I read it in two sittings. I thought it was so fascinating as I went through. It was kind of a distillation of what I'd been thinking already, and it was like, oh, somebody actually put this into words, kind of what I was trying to figure out. So that's what prompted me to enjoy it so much. Um, let's see. As we wrap things up, why don't we've talked about the book, but where can people get it? I did put a link in the low bar there for folks who are looking, and that's the primary place that they can get your book.
I typically refer people to Barnes and Noble because I think they get it a little fat. I think that it's a little cheaper than Amazon.
Okay.
You can get it from Amazon. The second edition is now out. You get the nice hardcover edition to cudgel people if shame doesn't work to bring them into line.
Hmm.
Uh, and I would say probably your best bet is Barnes and Noble, although there are any number of retailers throughout the world. If you're
And
based in
then
the U.S., probably Barnes and Noble.
And then if people wanted to contact you, I think I put it in the low bar as well. You have your own website there, and there's a contact button on there for them to send you an email or something like that.
Yes, and if they just want, and the PDF is available freely. If you go to brantvongoble.com, you can
Hmm.
just see the rules PDF. You click. The most recent edition is just a download away. So there's
Yeah,
that.
so it's unbelievably reasonable. Then Brand will give you the book for free to read to start with, and then when you want your hard copy, which you will, then you can just order. I mean, it doesn't
Yes,
get like a much better deal than that. Uh,
yes,
and so, I would be remiss as we're closing up here not to say the same thing about another good book.
yeah. There you
Uh,
go.
okay, well, let's not get let the light on it there. There we go. Really and Raven. That's one that I wrote, and
Yeah.
much like Brant, you can get it for free right here on this YouTube channel. I actually narrate every single chapter on there, so for those of you who have trouble falling asleep, I'm told my nice mellifluous voice will drift you off as you listen to each chapter. Or you can look in the low bar for the links for all that stuff. And of course, the usual stuff like my game. If you want to play my game, which is totally free, there's that too. And of course, we have merch. So we have stuff down there for sure. Yeah, doing the whole podcast experience here. Is there anything you'd like to wrap it up with? Any final comments about to bring up about either your book or the application thereof?
Can I wrap it up with the mantra, which is in the
Yeah,
book?
absolutely. You're right. I forgot the mantra. Yes, please.
Okay. So this chapter 7 in my book, the free PDF, or you can get the nice hardcover. And so I think this kind of summarizes, I think this pretty well summarizes the mindset. I do not care. I will not care unless I choose to care. Soon I will be dead. I do not have the time to care about bullshit. And I would advocate everybody who's listening, man or woman, the one woman who will see this, maybe, is to think about the sheer preciousness of your time. I'll end with an old inscription that an abbreviated version of which the pagans would put on their tombstone, which was non fue, non sum, non curo. I was not, I was, I am not, I don't care. Think about the sheer preciousness of your time and think about how you can make use of that, because that's really all you've got.
Absolutely.
I think we can maybe take that as a takeaway from the book.
Yeah, for sure. Could not agree more. Cool. It's been very great having you, Brant. Stick around for a little bit after I close off the stream, and we'll talk for a couple minutes. But I will let these folks at home go at this point. Hey, it's been really good having you on the Skid stream, and thanks for we've got 3 viewers left, so 3 is better than 0, so we're doing all right tonight. And thanks for being part of the very first one.
Well, thank you. Always glad to be here.
All right, I'll take us out. All right, good night, folks.